We're looking at non-communicable diseases, and we're going to look at smoking and the risks of smoking. Smoking still seems to be relatively popular with students. Now, why? Well, it's not perhaps seen to be quite as cool as it was in perhaps when I was young to sort of smoke. People then sort of did that to be cool, and now people know, well, it's dangerous, it's going to do some damage, but there is a lot of, yeah, but that won't happen for a long time, and it won't happen to me, and everyone else is smoking, so why shouldn't I? Because I've got to be in with the gang. Until you start having a look at what's going on. And when you start looking at what's going on, you start to think, well, why? Why would I want to do this? So we've got in smoking some bits and pieces that are not so good. So let's cut this here with smoking and what's in there. And we've covered a few of these bits already in a previous time, but we'll have a look at nicotine. It's an addictive drug. Doesn't really do any harm, but it's there to try and make you do something else. Take in carbon monoxide, and this is poisonous. This is going to give you lots of problems. And we've got the tar, which will also cause a few problems. Carbon monoxide, it basically reacts with the blood, particularly hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, you may know, is a clever little protein found in red blood cells. Or erythrocytes, as they're called. And it consists of 4 molecules of a chemical called globin, and that binds a special group that attracts oxygen, and this holds oxygen. And it's very clever how it works, that when there is a low amount of CO2 around, then this thing binds oxygen. And when there is high CO2, where we would typically find this in the muscles, so low CO2 is where we're in the lungs, high CO2 in the muscles, then it releases O2, and that's its basic function. Bring in carbon monoxide, and now this simply sticks to hemoglobin. So there is no oxygen transfer, and if there's no oxygen transfer, it doesn't pick up any oxygen in the lungs, and it doesn't release it in the muscles. And this is particularly a problem if you're female and you're pregnant, because that is simply less oxygen to the fetus, and that then means that the fetus is not going to grow properly, and this increases the amount of stillbirths. How about the problem of tar? Well, we know tar is a carcinogen. In other words, it causes cancer. Don't have to worry about cancer because you smoke now. It won't be until several years' time that the cancer causes any problem, so we don't have to worry about it. Yes, we do. Yeah, so we're going to get a whole variety of cancers, all to do with the lungs. Basically, the tar stops a lot of the lungs working really as well as it can. If we look at what a lining of a bit of lung looks like, it's got these are cells, and we've got little moving hairs, cilia, and these move things like the sticky mucus that lines the lungs, and it moves it up and generally down into the throat where it's sort of gone. Now, one of the functions of the smoke is that this is calmed. Let's give a good word for this. It's anaesthetised, so basically they don't work. They stop working for a time, and this allows, simply, instead of things being brought out, it allows all sorts of dirt, particles and so on to go into the lungs. And I suppose it's also going to allow pathogens more into the lungs. So that's the function of the smoke. The tar is really pleasant, nice stuff. It's a black stuff. It's sticky. And what else can we say from it? Well, it turns your lungs from a nice pink colour to a sort of a grey colour, and basically this causes some inflammation. Of the lungs. Okay, so we got that. That doesn't sound too bad, does it? Because of course you can always stop, and as soon as you stop, things are better. Except of course, did I mention this was addictive? One of our problems that we get is something called COPD. This is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Now, this reduces the surface area to volume ratio of the lungs. So this is going to cause breathlessness. And I've seen various people with emphysema. They start walking up the stairs, and by the time they reach the stair, halfway up the stairs, they've run out of breath, and they carry oxygen cylinders around with them. And worse, they've done it to themselves, and they thought, well, it didn't matter, it doesn't matter to smoke, so why smoke? Well, it's still considered to be cool. It's rebelling, isn't it? Because, yeah, nobody else does it, so we can do it because we can show we're different. And it helps me diet, and it helps me feel calm. Yeah, there are better ways of feeling calm, perhaps. So, what else does it do? So it's obviously going to affect the heart as well, because you're carrying less oxygen around. And if you're carrying less oxygen around, then certain muscles are going to have problems. Now, certain muscles, don't worry about it too much. You may not be able to run as fast. But the biggest problem is the heart pumping that oxygen around. So first of all, you're pumping less oxygen around because there's carbon monoxide bound to the blood. And now the heart isn't working probably as effective as it used to be. So this is another problem. So we've got here smoking causing various problems, and here the disease is CVD, cardiovascular disease. So what does smoking do? Well, it can narrow the blood vessels. This increases the blood pressure, and this causes more damage. And as it causes more damage, basically we can get more clots. This does take time. This is why one cigarette isn't dangerous. But over the time it becomes more dangerous. Of course, you might be one of those lucky people that one cigarette is all it takes to set something off. You just don't know. But of course, it's never going to be you, is it? So all these things are increasing blood pressure. And that causes all sorts of problems which lead to a heart attack and a stroke. And in a previous video we've seen that the majority of deaths now worldwide caused by heart attacks and strokes. So you need to try and get this down, and we get this down by being a little bit more healthy. So where are we going to start with this? So a lot of that was a recap. So let's start now with working out, well, what it is to be healthy. What do we need to try and get rid of all these basically non-communicable diseases? And it comes down to a few things. Basically, the few things that we come down to are simply diet, and exercise. So we are what we eat. A healthy diet, and this is a big problem in largely the Western world, that basically we eat too much. We like our food, we enjoy our food, we want more food, and food has that effect on us. We like it, it tastes nice, and it's moreish, and we see lots of adverts on the television and around us telling us food. There are all these YouTube channels on good ways to eat, lots of food that you can have. But countering that, there are quite a lot on diet and exercise and trying to eat healthily. Generally, there is one good diet and it works, and that's eating less. It is basically the only one that really works. So if we look at how much energy you use during the day, then that's the amount of energy you need to basically take in if you're going to stay healthy. Most people grow up to the age of about 14, 15, 16, 18, that time. And then after that, they don't grow anymore. Their only options really are to grow out. In other words, put on weight. And part of that is trying to eat sensibly, but reduce the calorie input, because we don't, in the Western world, we don't need to take in as much food as we actually do. And it is a choice of trying to cut down on certain foods and try and boost other foods. Yeah, the other foods tend to be the ones that people don't like, the dreaded veg. So we've got to try and eat better, but going with that is exercise. So diet, we've got to try and basically make sure that the amount that we take in equals the amount we take out. And if you do want to eat more, then exercise is where it comes in. The idea of exercise is it starts in school, and you look at doing exercise basically day by day. The idea is to try and get into students the idea of doing exercise day by day. It can start off with a walk to school. How many of you travel by car because, oh, it's a little bit too far to walk? Yeah, it's 10 minutes walk, it's 20 minutes walk. It's good for you. I would have thought if you actually did a walk to school of 30 minutes, that would be good for you. And maybe dropping someone off with a walk at the end of the drive. I suppose you live too far away to walk, then perhaps not parking you outside the school but letting you do some walking would actually be a good idea. It's not just, however, walking. Maybe you can start cycling to school. Oh, that's dangerous, isn't it? Yeah, not really. Not as dangerous as perhaps not cycling to school. So people who exercise regularly are going to be fitter than people who don't. I was talking to one of my mums, and she went to the doctors and they were doing a overhaul, and they said that she was an athlete, and she was most surprised that no, she wasn't. But what she did work out, she did an awful lot of walking still, and she did a lot of cycling, and to a certain extent she also did some running, and that made her an athlete. And she said she was anything but an athlete, but it was keeping her fit. And the fitter you are, the more capable you are of basically resisting all of these infections and these other non-communicable diseases. So walking, perhaps some running, and I have to try and think of when I last did some serious running. It's a while ago. So cycling is good for you, walking is good for you, running is good for you. In this time of having the COVID-19 virus going round causing problems, still the government wanted people to do walking, cycling and running, getting out and doing something to try and keep them fit, because if you can stay fit, you've got a fitter heart, you've probably got bigger lungs, and therefore, well, let's have a look and see what we've got. So let's take a fat person and let's take a healthy person. Let's see the difference here. So the healthy person, we've got the diet's going to be good, and the fat person, well, what can we say about their diet? Well, basically they are probably eating, could be healthy, but it's too much. Now we want to look at exercise. Well, exercise in a fat person is harder. They've got more weight to carry around. Yes, this is being fattest. This is having a go at people who are fat. Not nice. But it is something people can do about. Exercise, generally, because they are bigger, heavier, fatter, it's more effort to do exercise. So generally people who are healthy, they do more exercise. So these require more effort, these just do more. And what's that going to do here? Well, we're looking at, it can be a job. One of my jobs is I sit down a lot of the time. This isn't good for me. If I sit down and do video conferencing, it's not as good for me as if I'm walking around a classroom. So let's see what can we do to try and get this fat person to become a healthy person. Well, fairly easy start, isn't it? What we're going to do is we're going to change the diet. Doesn't have to be done quickly, it can be done slowly to start moving around. So basically, eat less, and it's changing some habits. I'm not going to really have a go at fast food, but a lot of fast food isn't terribly healthy for you. So we need to eat less, we need to change the habits, and we need to start doing walk more, run more, cycle more. Doesn't have to be a lot, just has to start doing more things. Anything moving around is regarded as exercise, and that could mean use the car less. It can mean use a bus, because a bus rarely takes you to where you want to go. It usually takes you to near where you want to go, and then you need to walk. And perhaps you need to walk for perhaps 30 minutes a day. You can get rid of the car for shorter trips, perhaps even get rid of the bus for shorter trips and cycle instead. Where I live there are hills. Well, how do we get around those hills? Well, you do what I do. I walk up the hills because some of them are just too steep to try and cope with the bicycle, or they're too steep for too long a time. So over a period of time, then I can start managing to cycle up these hills. So gradually this fat, unhealthy person starts to become slightly less, and as this less happens, then it becomes easier to do more exercise, and as you get used to eating less, then you can cut down a little bit more, and you can cut down a little bit more after that. If we look at a lot of people, we find that we've got very few underweight. So we've got some people who are underweight. Then we've got the healthy. Then we've got those that are basically fat, and then we'll go to the basically those that are now in fear of their lives. They've become obese. Trying to get back from here is hard work. This is what we all want, and if you talk to quite a few people who are obese, what they really want is if they could suddenly lose their weight, they could be healthy, they could do more things. But the further you get down this line, the harder it is to go back. And so we need to start here. And we need to start here in schools with day-by-day exercise. And a lot of students don't like it. Basically, I look at students, and there are those that really enjoy doing the exercise, that really get a kick out of it, that makes them feel good, and they can't understand that a lot of other children, people, don't get a buzz out of running around and doing things. It doesn't seem to make them feel good. And they can't understand why, when they say to someone, but it makes you feel good, I get a rush, and other people just say, well, I don't get a rush, and people can't sort of see the other side. Yet we all need to try and stay healthy, because staying healthy is basically going to keep you alive a little bit longer. So there are, if you like, causal mechanisms that explain here. If you're healthy, you're going to have more muscle tissue. If you've got more muscle tissue, this will increase your metabolic rate, and therefore you're likely to be less overweight. And if you're less overweight, then you're less likely to get a whole variety of different diseases. Diseases such as, and I'm going to read a few, arthritis. I've got some in my fingers. Diabetes, generally considered to be a disease that you get if you're overweight and you don't basically do enough exercise. High blood pressure. So if we look at the people in the older population, we see a lot of arthritis, and quite a lot of this is due to being overweight. Being overweight puts more pressure on certain joints, and that doesn't help. We see quite a lot of diabetes, and in this country, the UK, and in the United States of America, we see a fairly high amount of type 2 diabetes, which is generally, not exclusively, but generally caused by basically being too fat and not doing enough exercise. And being old doesn't help the matter either. So we've got to try and do something about this. And there are various sort of education programs to try and persuade people to be better, to do more exercise. Big problem with exercise is it takes time. You've got to make time to do something. You've got to decide that in fact doing that exercise is more important than playing this game. And it's a change of not just the body, it's a change of the mind, it's a change of attitude to say that I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to try and do some exercise rather than anything else. And if you set yourself modest goals, then you'll see that in fact it makes more than modest achievements. But it's things you have to do consistently. You can't just go for a walk one day and expect to be thin the next. It's something you have to work at. It's a change of lifestyle. And we're seeing in this country at the moment a complete change of lifestyle for many people. Instead of going to work, they're staying at home. And instead of staying at home, they ought to be trying to do some exercise. Get out, do some exercise. That's what we're all told that we need to do. So we need to worry about the major problem for this 21st century, and I'm going to call that diabetes type 2. Basically, in type 2 diabetes, you're not making enough insulin. Now, either you're not making enough insulin, or basically your cells have got tired and they're sort of not playing around as well. So if you're not making enough insulin, then the problems here are going to be, you're going to have circulation problems. This is going to really affect your kidneys, can affect your eyesight, and it will probably lead to death. Type 2 diabetes is more common with age, and unfortunately some people have a genetic tendency to develop it. There is basically a lot of evidence here about being overweight, about not doing enough exercise, and being old can significantly increase your risk of getting type 2 diabetes. But let's be frank about this. You can get type 2 diabetes at any age. You are not just limited to getting it when you're old. We're looking at the moment, approaching something like about 4 million people in the UK having type 2 diabetes. And we're looking at those, probably about 90% will be type 2. And what can we do about this? Well, simply, if you do have type 2 diabetes, then you go on a diet. You have to change your food, because if you don't, you're going to die. So I know this with my father had type 2 diabetes, and he decided he would do something about it. So he did something about his diet, and after a while he no longer had type 2 diabetes. People can restore their systems simply by eating a better diet, controlled amounts of carbohydrates, so losing weight, and doing lots of exercise. So I've seen that this can work, that you can turn type 2 diabetes into something which is less dangerous to you. You can get rid of it, and it's simply down to diet, exercise, and this will conquer many diseases. We don't think of many diseases as being beaten by diet and by basically exercise, but it works. If we go back through the annals of history, people were generally fitter than they are now. At the moment we have lots of cars, mass transport systems. Years ago, anywhere you wanted to go, you had to walk. Nowadays, we can all get food, no problem. Too much food. So, try and cut down a little bit on some of your food. So, exercise and cut down, because you want your intake to be similar to your outtake, how much you're actually going to use up. And that's called just basically eating sensibly. And I'm not advocating here people sort of going on crash diets. What I am advocating is just cut down a little bit if you're overweight. If you're okay, then good, stay on that, but do more exercise. And if you do more exercise, then you can actually eat a little bit more, because if you're doing more exercise, then you're changing your body. And we're after trying to build up more muscle, because this increases your metabolism, which in fact then increases how much of your food is actually sort of got rid of. You are looking at then increasing your lung capacity and your heart pumping rate, so you've got more blood, so your heart rate when you're resting goes down, so your heart's not being put under so much strain. And if that's the case, then you're being a bit more healthy. I like to see students running around doing things rather than being sat there saying, oh, it's too much effort. Getting everyone up doing things is good for some, it's hard for others, but if it's hard for you, it can be worth sort of putting in the effort. So there's one other big area that causes problems, especially in the young, and that is alcohol. So let's have a look at alcohol. Well, a little bit of alcohol, I suppose, isn't too bad for you. People talk about this, but it's basically a social drug. What does alcohol do? Well, basically, you have to remember it is a poison. If you would like to take a drink of pure ethanol, then this is remarkably bad for you. So here I've got some nice ethanol. It's rectified, that means it's got some sort of nasty additives to it. But if you want to drink this alcohol, then simply you're going to die. Pure alcohol is very effective at killing you. Now, it's also, unfortunately, addictive. After an alcoholic drink, well, you've got this alcohol called ethanol, and this ethanol is absorbed into the blood and it goes into the tissues and it generally makes its way to the brain. Now, once you have got this in the brain, then basically it's going to affect the nervous system. It's going to make the thought processes worse. We all know that people act drunk. This is because of the alcohol affecting the brain, and a lot of them feel that it's actually good for them, and we see that their reflexes become slower. Small amounts of alcohol makes people basically feel relaxed. That's good, isn't it? It makes them feel cheerful, and it basically reduces the inhibitions, and we can see that that can have some good effects for people. In small amounts, yeah, but in larger amounts, then we get simply a loss of self-control, and people start to do really stupid things. They have a lack of any judgment, and this in large amounts can lead to unconsciousness, and in some respects it can cause a coma and death. So a small amount occasionally isn't really considered to be too harmful. The problem is really when you become addicted to it and you need larger and larger amounts. The alcohol needs to be got rid of, and it's got rid of in the liver. The liver is now going to start taking action against the alcohol, but the alcohol destroys liver cells, so we end up with a problem called cirrhosis of the liver. This is a liver disease that destroys the liver tissue, The active liver cells are replaced with scar tissue that, well, they don't do anything. Alcohol is also a carcinogen. It causes cancer. So it causes particularly liver cancer. And these usually spread very rapidly and all over the body, and they're amazingly difficult to treat. Long-term alcohol also is going to damage. We're seeing that it's affecting the brain, in affecting the thought processes, the reflexes are slower, and then we get a loss of self-control and poor judgment and unconsciousness. So we are looking at damages to the brain, and we notice that the brain becomes, instead of normal, it becomes soft and pulpy. The brain structures are lost, and then people can no longer function that way, and it causes problems. Just with smoking, we can look at here alcohol and pregnancy. Basically, if a pregnant woman drinks alcohol, it passes across the placenta to the baby. And so now we're getting the baby that's being drunk. This is affecting the baby's thought processes, it's affecting their reflexes, it's affecting their self-control, lack of judgment, unconsciousness. That's not so good, and they're not even having any fun. So we're looking at this causing miscarriages, stillbirths, premature births, low birth weight, all related to alcohol. Basically, the developing liver can't cope with alcohol, so the brain and the body of the unborn baby is badly affected. And we can see them with physical deformities. Which is often what leads to miscarriages and stillbirths and various other things. We have something called FAS. FAS is fetal alcohol syndrome. The child can be basically born as an alcoholic. Doctors aren't sure how much alcohol is safe during pregnancy, and simply the best bet is not to bother. So, alcohol. Well, it's probably best not to bother. But then it's a social thing. We ought to drink alcohol and go out. Well, I go out with people, but I don't have to drink alcohol. In fact, I'm usually the poor soul that drives people there and back, so I don't drink any alcohol at all. And I still can have a good time. If the other people are losing their inhibitions and calmer and more relaxed, being with people who are like that can make me more calm and relaxed. So how about the last thing that we can think of that's going to cause problems? And that is ionising radiation. So, ionising radiation. Basically, it doesn't do you any good whatsoever. So where are we going to get that from? Well, we've got UV rays from the sun. There's not much we can do about that. This increases skin cancers. We've got things like radioactive things in the soil and in the air, and there's not much we can try and do that. Places like the Pennines, Cornwall, have higher radon levels because they're in granite rich areas, and it doesn't help if you have to have a medical or a dental x-ray. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, but limit them. And we've got problems with always with these things about various accidents. Fukushima, Chernobyl can spread ionizing radiation around. So this radiation penetrates the cells, and it's going to damage the DNA, and that will lead to mutations. So stay away from alcohol, stay out of the sun, don't smoke, eat less. Sounds horrible, grim life this, doesn't it? And do more exercise. But if you can do all those, then your chances of surviving are going to be a lot greater. If you enjoyed this, give us a thumbs up. If you like this, then why not subscribe? And you can pick up more biology GCSE topic by topic. I will see you next week when we'll do some more, and I'll see you then. Stay safe. Bye bye.